said to me, if you thank people, just thank everyone collectively, because you'll leave someone out and you'll be in trouble. So, but really I suppose we need to thank Warner Music, because we tried really hard to bring the Sharpies back into history, or be recognised in history, and it was actually the music that did it, and we got the mainstream media recognition, and they focused on what was important to us, which was the music and the fashion. When Sam said to me, can you do a talk? I said, oh, everyone's sick of me banging on about stuff, but he assured me that people weren't, so you can blame him anyway. So I'll get straight into it. A little bit of nerves. So the first mention of Sharpies I've been able to find so far is 1951, and they were a variation of the bodgies and the widgies. They're mentioned and described in William Dick's book, A Bunch of Rat Bags. William Dick was the leader of the Footscray bodgies, and he describes the Sharpies as they were a breakaway from the bodgies and widgies in that they said their clothes weren't bodgy. They weren't made out of bodgy fabrics. And he said they were short-lived because it was almost impossible to distinguish them. My dad was a bodgy, so that's him. That's him there. And quite a few of the Sharpies had parents that were bodgies and widgies. Richard, who's here today, this is his mum and dad. That's my mum and dad, she was a widgie as well. This is another friend's photo. I wondered if this maybe was someone that considered themselves a Sharpie, because they had... Thanks. I wondered if it was someone that considered themselves a Sharpie, because William Dick in the book actually describes the cardigans with the stripes, so it's definitely an early prototype. They're mentioned in the media in 1955, and if I can get the right spot, just there, you can see they're talking about the sharp clothes, and in this article they actually relate the sharp to the 1%ers, to the violent side of it. But the media have always beaten up and made a big deal out of rebellious youth. In response to the bodgies and the widgies on the streets, the establishment didn't like it, so they brought in the bodgy squad, and they over-policed the youth.
Strong arm tactics.
This is from about 1954, I think, and I know there's some young men and maybe some young women in this room who were on the receiving end of this unofficial, I don't know, enforcement tactic, where it was acceptable for police to beat up, well, basically they were beating up young children, but they were calling them hoodlums. And you can see down the bottom, it was the teenagers that they were worried about. So as well as the police and the councils getting in on it, in an effort to try and get the young children to obey, they also brought the government in on it, and that was where they brought in the Child Welfare Act. And if someone was in moral danger, which mainly meant out dancing, having fun, coming home late, they could end up in Winlayton or Tirana, which was juvenile detention, and that was very unfair. In 1963, that's one of the first mentions of the Sharpies as we know them. This photo is of Rodney. He's here today, and he was part of the Oakley Sharpies. And here you can see the style of the 60s Sharpies. This is mid-1960s. Rod's pants, they're the window pane. It was when they first started changing from stovepipe pants worn by the rockers through to the wider flags which were worn by the Sharpies, and this is the in-between stage. The two ladies, they're Sharpie girls from Coburg. Rhonda and her friend, the day that photo was taken, they went into the city and a young tattooed Sharpie boy ran past and he sort of said, "Can I stand with you girls? The cops are after me." And he put his arm through them and they ended up getting married. They didn't live happily ever after, but they got married and had children. And in fact, his son's a cop now. Here's another photo of 60 Sharpies. So this is Rodney and his gang. You can really see that the crest knits and the pants are still narrow there. I don't know if we've really got many photos of Sharpies wearing the flags. This is Frank in this photo. Frank's the drummer from City Sharps. It's probably one of the only photos of him as a Sunshine Sharpie. I think it's about 1966. So,
is he being held up there?
Pardon?
Is he being held?
Frank, is Frank here? No. Oh, I'm not sure.
Second from the left.
There?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His chest.
Yeah. So, he only looks like a baby. So, when your 16th birthday, when Sam said, you know, to do the show, we'll mainly do it mainly on the 70 Sharpies. We cannot recognise the 70 Sharpies without recognising the 60 Sharpies first.
Fair enough.
Here's another one. I found it on Facebook, and I'm sorry about not referencing the photos. I know it's not good, but I've had some of them for so long, I really don't know where they got them from. So, and I figure Sharpies don't really care about plagiarism. And so this one's on Facebook, and it's, I think, 1968. But once again, you can see the prototype of the stripes. I believe it was taken in Carnegie. So in 1966, there was a huge brawl in the city between the Sharpies and the mods, and it's hard to say whether there was really 200 there or not. You know what the media is like. But once again, as a result, the police over-policed the Sharpies and cleaned the city up again. And they brought in the Special Duties Squad. And if you look at the blokes, were all 6 foot and 13 stone, and they're gathering up teenagers, children. And as well as the cops being on the 60 Sharpies, this young Sharpie's just been punched in the stomach, I believe, by one of the Bob Jones bouncers. And here you can actually see they're still wearing the winkle picker shoes. That was just before the chisels came out. And the Sharpie boys also wore sandals, which you can see. This is something from, I think it was Monash University, and you can find it online, and it says Sharpies the Dying Race, and it was 1967. And when you read through it, you can actually find the comparisons between the 60s and the 70s. Like in the top left-hand corner, you can see the business cards that the Sharpies used to print. A lot of them were apprentice printers or bookbinders. And I know Jacko, who's here today, he still had business cards, or he made business cards in the 70s. So by 69, most of the Sharpies had been chased out of the city, moved along. There were still a few there, but not in the great numbers. And I've been told that some of the early Melbourne underbelly type people were the Sharpies in like 69. And I think Eric, who's here today, may have been selling newspapers then at Flinders Street. Sorry, running out of breath. So this photo here is 1970, 1971, and it's the Camberwell boys. And you can see they've got long hair, although the one in the middle is starting to get that sharp look. And I called that one before, and this one's after. So according to Chris O'Halloran, who's no longer with us, he said that he remembers one of the guys in his gang, I think his name was Mick Mac, was the first one who went into the barber shop and asked to have his hair cut short. It was long, and he left the tails. Apparently when Chris said to Mick, "Is that how it was?" Apparently he said to him, this is, in the last few years, "Whatever you reckon, Chris." So, doesn't matter, it's an urban legend. And until we find someone else that wants to pop up and say, "No, we were the first one with tails," I'm going to go with this. So, as Peter Brooks says, the tails were the most defining part of the 1970s Sharpies. And once you had your tails, it didn't matter what you wore. You'd always be known to be a Sharpie. And you can hear that there's some schoolgirls, one of them's actually got her school uniform on, the other ones are out of uniform. But there's no mistaking that she's a Sharpie. So it didn't matter what you wore, you would be known as being a Sharpie. In the early 70s, the Sharpie started to gather again. It was a different look, and once again the media took a bit of an interest, but it was just more of a social interest rather than the criminal side of it. And in 73 there were 3 different groups of Sharpies hanging around the city. There was a group in the city square, a group in De Grave Street, and the Flinders Street Sharps. And eventually they all got together, the head guys, and I have been told that Chopper Read is in this photo, but I'm not quite sure.
I can see him, he's at the back there.
Yeah.
See his chops, can't you see him?
Yeah.
That's the bloke who plays.
So, and that was when the Melbourne Sharps t-shirt was first made. This shirt belongs to Peter Brooks. He was part of Frankston, and that was a Frankston design, and he brought it over into Melbourne, and he's still got the t-shirt today, which is great. So this is the Melbourne Sharpies becoming a brand almost, and you can see them standing on Flinders Street Station. So I'll just go back a bit. So once again, they were starting to get a bit of a presence in the city, and at times I've been led to believe there was hundreds of Sharpies in the city, especially to around Moomba time or on the way to the show. So once again, the police decided to over-police them and arrest a lot of the head guys, and just the numbers dwindled, but there were still people that went in the city, but they weren't as visible in the smaller groups. So this photo is actually from 77.
Stewart Street.
Yeah, but it gives you an idea of the over-policing. So there's, I think, 9 or 10 Sharpies there and 5 cops. So during that time when they were moving along and arresting some of the key people, there was a bit of a love story. Bobby on the left saw Wendy and he said to her, "I'll meet you here next Friday night." And Wendy turned up and there was no Bobby. So this is about 1974. So many years go past, the internet gets invented, and on a site called Slack Bastard, a few of us found our way there, and we're talking about Sharpies. And Bobby and Wendy were telling their individual stories, and they realised who the other was. And they were both, I think they may have both been separated at the time, but they met up again at Sam's exhibition in 2010, and they're still together. So in spite of Victoria Police doing their best, that's a love story that survived. So with the police moving everyone on, a lot of the Sharpies just went back to their respective suburbs. The Frankston Sharps were a very big gang. So they went back to Frankston. It's Frankston again. These guys were from Sunbury. One of the Frankston Sharps having a dance at the showgrounds. These guys are from Avondale Heights. They're from Ascot Vale. Awesome Place. Footscray. Back to the eastern suburbs, so Croydon girls on the left, Boronia girls on the right, once again at high school. These ladies are from Glenroy. And so around about the time when all the Sharpies had been moved along from the city, there were still some Sharpies left, and often they were the older, heavier guys that had got out of jail. So when the younger Sharpies came into the city, they'd get heavied. So this is the A&A Sharps here. They were big from Glenroy, and they were named after a group after an estate where all the streets ended in the letters A-N-A. So they had a long battle with the Bayside Sharps. We don't have any photos of them. But when they were going into the city and being heavied by the other guys, they got together and Enemies United, and they got a few other gangs, and they all went into the city and cleaned out the Melbourne Sharps that were bully boys.
Uniting districts, yes!
So in the suburbs, what else was going on? There was the music. That was always a key thing for the Sharpies. So this is Box Hill Town Hall. I believe the band's been identified as Buffalo, and the band that played afterwards was AC/DC.
Yo!
I'm not sure where this one is, but I love this picture. You can see the girl in the blue t-shirt, and all eyes are on her as they're mimicking her moves. So that's the Sharpie
And the
band.
guys are looking at that one too.
So by about 76, the Melbourne Sharps had sort of started to come together again. These were a younger group of guys from different suburbs. There were a lot from the eastern suburbs. And so this is where I come into it. So all of this happened outside of my knowledge. I didn't learn any of this until now, and I've just sort of pieced it together. So this is me in 1976. So you can see I go from a teenage girl with freckles and a bad fringe, smiling, to a snarling Sharpie almost overnight.
And she hasn't lost it either.
One of my first Sharpie besties was Jacko. I believe he's still here. Yeah, he's here. Yeah, we were very good friends. And he had hair, yeah, and he always reckons I'm a wannabe, so, that's all right. So we were besties, and we'd meet up at Iceland, Croydon Market, and when we were there, we'd just befriend any Sharpies that came down, because usually, even if they were from gangs, they were loners at the time, and we'd always have a chat. So in the past, I've been asked, why was I a Sharpie? And I always say, it was about the community. I wanted friends, I wanted to belong. But later on, I went away and thought, no, that's bullshit. It was about the boys. So this was my first Sharpie boyfriend, Skeeter. He said sorry, he couldn't come today. So through Skeeter, I got to meet the Melbourne Sharps, who I used to idolise when I was skating around the ice skating ring and see them in the corner. So then I really got to hang out with the cool kids. So some of the people from there are here today, little Dave, Steph. So this was at, I think, Aussie Rock in Boronia. I got to meet Angry Anderson. So for a 14-year-old schoolgirl, it was huge. It sort of raised my status in the high school as well. One of my high school friends is here today. She was 2 years older than me, and she used to give me her cardigans when she grew out of them, and she'd often pull me up if I didn't have the fashion right. I can remember one time I had a little striped t-shirt on under a Connie, and yeah, she made me, don't wear that again. And so when I was saying hanging out with the cool kids, so Eric, he's on the right. Eric's very famous in the Sharpie world, and Colin Creed, two in from the left, he's a very well-known tattooist. So I just felt like I was hanging out with rock stars. So after I broke up with Skeeter, because I was that bit younger, all the Melbourne Sharps that I knew, they'd all pretty much grown up and moved on. And for the people that were younger, or that were a little bit lost, or didn't have a partner, there was really no other Sharpies. So, or we thought there wasn't. So for a little while I went out with long hair and that ended up in tears and insults. And then I went round to visit Karen on the left. This is Jenny, Linda and Karen. They called themselves JLK Sharps. I knew them from the Melbourne days, and they were always known as Steph's apprentices, which really pissed them off because Karen said, I've had my hair cut longer than Steph. So I went round to visit Karen. Oops. And in the meantime, the girls had found some new Sharpies. So these guys were from Newlands in Coburg, and they started going out with them. Quite quickly, Newlands Sharps joined with the Westside Sharps. And then because I was single again, I remember going through Jacko's photo album, looking through and saying, I want that one. And I picked out the blonde, and then we became boyfriend and girlfriend. And we hung out for a while. Hanging out with Westside was probably one of the most fun times of my life because we were so close in age. And I nearly took these ones out, but I put them back in. So we had a lot of fun. Drinking. Spewing could be fun too if there was someone to make fun of, and there was times when it was me. Pashing and rooting. No young women were harmed during that photo taking. And as you can see, because there weren't as many gangs around, the cops weren't quite as heavy on the Sharpies. This was taken on New Year's Eve, I think 79, on Flinders Street Station. So I ended up breaking up with Iggy. This is a sketch one of the Sharpies gave me. They used to call me 10 Thumbs because I was such a bossy bitch, and this is to represent. So I got dumped for being bossy. And then I met up with chap from St Albans. He's here today with the St Albans guys, and I hung out with them for quite a long time. And there had been a little... St Albans were very close with Westside. We all went out together as a group. And then here you can start to see where the fashion's ending and the time's changing. So this is 1980, probably New Year's Eve. And you can see Steph's become a punk, young Tony's become a punk, Dom, well, he turned into a disco boy, and you can see Brenda and Karen, they've still got the Sharpie looks. This photo here is taken around about the same time, and it was just, you know, a whole heap of us drinking at a house having fun, and someone's about to throw a bucket of water over everybody. But if you kind of analyse this picture, it's half Westside, half Melbourne. So, you know, people were still around. So, as well as the hair defining the Sharpies, also the clothes. And here you can see the cardigan favoured by the Westside Sharps, which Damo's done a great job of reproducing. We're nearly finished, guys. T-shirts were important, and it's probably important to say that not all gangs thought themselves as a gang. The early Melbourne Sharps just thought themselves as a group. They didn't consider themselves a structured gang. There's Thomastown with their T-shirts all together. Jewellery was really important as well. It was unisex. Sharpie boys were the first heterosexual males to have pierced ears, and the jewellery would be interchangeable. So if you met a Sharpie on the street, you might exchange earrings. Tattoos were a big part of it as well. And thank you to everybody that's helped bring the Sharpies back into the community or history or whatever, and you know, now we can make our mark. And if anyone's interested, I am working on the third book of tales. Mainly it's going to be autobiographical things, because when I was doing the book Snap, some people took time to handwrite beautiful stories and post them to me. Other people typed them and emailed, and they were too good to just be included in a book that had a lot of internet stuff. So I kept them back and hope that one day I'll have enough to have tales. So thank you very much for listening, and if anyone wants to correct me on anything, I'm always open to fixing my notes up. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Julie Mack. Fantastic. All right, freshen up your drinks in a few minutes' time. The meat.